It's how wordy you want to be today. Welcome, everybody. We're here with Derek Space, um, the owner of Con Consult
Consulgenics.
Consulgenics. I said that correctly a few times. I'll get it right. And we're talking about the future of consulting and the AR industry. And we're joined here with Derek, and we're going to talk about his organization and looking at the clarity and complex challenges of helping businesses grow in an uncertain time and finding executions that will help the business and help them grow their business to a relevant day and age of changes in the market. And Derek, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here
Thank you very
today.
much, Derek.
All right, so let's get right into it. How did we get this business up and running, and what is the premise behind it?
Yeah, so my background is pretty diverse. Like I started working, so I started. So my first internship was in college, and I worked for Smith Barney, which shifted over to a few other companies since then, and then I worked for Arthur Anderson, which is no longer around, and then I worked for Morgan Stanley Dinwiddie in Buenos Aires. So my background was always been in finance, and I went to the University of Florida, graduated, and my first job was actually at Lehman Brothers. So I was working in investment management, investment banking. Coincidentally, my first day of work was actually 9/11, 2001, in the World Trade Center.
Wow.
Three World Financials across the street, but I went into the World Trade Center to went over from point A to point B. So I guess we could talk about that separately, but it was a very exciting first day.
Yes.
Very surreal in a lot of senses, but we always hear about PTSD and we always hear about issues that could happen and what has happened, but once you live it, it becomes very in front of you and sort of front of mind. And it was very difficult transition at first, right? So I was in that in space because I worked at, like I sort of mentioned it at Smith Barney and Dean Witter, and I really enjoyed it. It was really fun, cool times, long hours, going to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, coming back at 5 in the morning, closing deals. It was really, really awesome. And I wanted to pursue an MBA down the line a few years later, so I decided to leave. I went to PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and sort of surrounded myself with accounting, advisory, consulting, internal finance. I was doing that. For a few years, started an MBA up at the University of Connecticut, finished that, and then I had the opportunity to play golf with a senior VP at PEP as a client, and he brought me on board to oversee the corporate FP&A, corporate finance M&A for PepsiCo North America, and so we closed
Great.
Rockstar Energy Drink, Tazo Teas, and a few other pretty cool jobs. You brought up your background a little bit in terms of IBM and coming from Purchase, which is sort of that New York White Plains area.
Mhm.
There are three companies up there that were sort of quote unquote sweatshops. Is Pep, GE, and IBM. You sort of worked yourself to the bone, but you learned a lot. It was really fun. And from there, I went to I grew up in Coral Gables, Florida, which is down in Miami, and my wife's from Argentina, my mom's from Argentina, and at the time we felt it was worthwhile to come back down to Miami to live down here, and I did some consulting work down here, and then I started working for a company called AIG, American International Group, which is a rather large company. The movie Too Big to Fail was based on AIG.
Mhm.
Started in the portfolio management job for consumer lines, and that led me to becoming personal lines, consumer lines CFO for Latin America, overseeing a $900 million P&L for 17 different countries. That was exciting, fun, a lot of travel, a lot of cool times and fun stuff to do. But you know, insurance in general was very antiquated in how they did things. So Excel was still front and center. We had 17 different systems for 17 different countries, plus a master database ERP to consolidate all the information to one place. That led to bad timing for us to support New York. It is what it is. Ultimately, we rolled off and we went through a lot of different reductions in force, which are RIFs. And after about 8 RIFs, I transitioned over to another role for AIG, and then the writing was on the wall. So ultimately, I left 2018 and started my business, Consulgenics. The premise behind the business was to work with SMBs, small to medium-sized businesses, ideally under $50 million, help brick and mortar companies, companies that are doing well, but the owners are not happy necessarily with where they are. Maybe they're not making enough money, or they have employees that are making more money than they are, but they're happy to adequate and sort of support their journey. Coincidentally enough, my first contract was with, or my first client was with Aetna CVS Health, which is a Fortune 5 company, at $250 billion a year, and it sort of threw me off a little bit. But I was there for 3 years, so I can't say no to that. The day I started, the CFO left, so I was in an interim CFO capacity for about 6 months until they brought someone over from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and
Okay.
I stayed on there for about 2.5 years afterwards, supporting the organization, and that was really fun. When I left Aetna, I obviously became more enthralled into my day-to-day business, and that's where I am right now. What I noticed over the last 5 or 6 years was a big shift in how companies report information. So even though my main goal is operations and finance, or vice versa, I started looking at the bottlenecks. And one of the things I noticed was a very big lack in systems, specifically how they report. They always say about BS in is BS out, right? And I think that's very true. So the integrity of the systems is what really drives and provides adequate, reliable, and consistent information for the owners to make informed business decisions. When I noticed that there was a big lack of information, I sort of really started to implement systems differently. So became certified in Workday Adaptive Planning Insights, and worked very closely with Oracle NetSuite, SAP, Essbase, Great Plains, Microsoft Dynamics, obviously QuickBooks, Sage Intacct, and a few others to integrate, implement, and do things to help companies have a much stronger business operating system to make better decisions. From there, I started to help them to understand their financials and their operations and their what we call theory of constraints. So I look at it as a bottleneck, right? You have the sales, you have operations, you have finance and administration. There's obviously in most cases a bottleneck in one of the three areas in any company. I like to think of it as a sieve. Water comes in, it should be fluid. When there's a constraint somewhere, the water does not come out as fast as it should.
Right.
And that's where you should start focusing that information. Fast forward COVID, I was traveling all over the place. It was fantastic. And it became a little bit crazy in terms of COVID. So really shifted to in terms of the ERP implementations. And from there, just started working on helping companies become more profitable from a top line to bottom line perspective. I love revenue, but it's not going to move the needle. And when I look at revenue, I look at net income. That's much more important for me. And much more important than that is how is the client feeling from a growth perspective that he's able to scale the business and show it from an OPEX perspective versus revenue perspective. There's a lot of KPIs that we look at, but ultimately, growth is fantastic from a top line perspective. But when it comes to sheer numbers, if he's not profitable, cash is king. He's not going to be happy with what he's doing, right? So AI comes into play, and then a lot of things shifted, right? So, and that's where we're at right now. So, I hope that makes some sense.
Oh no, I mean you explained it in greater over overabundance, which is the most important thing is, in working with these small business owners, as we're talking about, and helping them see the big picture. And as you say at the end there, cash is king. If the revenue's not are being brought in the right way, they're wasting their time. Or even like you said earlier, is that the employees are making more than you are because they're taking care of their employees, reinventing so that it's fair across the boards. And as a business owner, they're walking away with their head held up high instead of like a beat puppy and going their tail between their legs, going, I don't know what to do. And that's the main focus that I see of your business is making sure that you can turn that around to a positive uh, net income that is very
Hmm.
focused on and be able to grow it. And that's been talking to others. I've seen the same thing is they don't look at the back end as much as they look at the front end. They think because they're making sales, they're making money. And it's not always the case because again, you're paying the employees, you're paying all these different areas. And so that's the one thing where I see the importance of something that you do and your specialty have worked with these large corporations can help them look at the needle and kind of bring it to it where it really needs to be. And those three mechanisms you said, the three different areas that they need to focus on is very important. So, and that's great to hear, and glad that someone's out there being able to work with their back end and make sure that that you can look at the business as a whole because you've done it for hospitals, you've done it for Coke, you've done it for hospitals, and you've hit all these different arenas. That's very great to hear. So, what is your ideal client? I know you've talked about a lot of different ones, and you started out working with the hospital and everything like that. So currently, what would be your ideal client, and what would you look at? What would your kind of evaluation be for them? What would be that process for your ideal client?
Yeah, so it's funny you talk about deal client. And there's a lot of theories about the tribe of buyers and tribes of 1,000 people and top 100 buyers, and there's a lot of ideas behind that. So my background is financial services, consumer products, insurance. Financial services and insurance are the same for me. And then you have CPG, which is consumer products, and then advisory, which is consulting. So those are my top three. One of the things you brought up, which is really interesting, was you look at when you look at top line, sometimes you're really overwhelmed with some of the information. And I'm going to bring Pepsi for a great example. At the time I was working there, they had about 35 products that were making $1 billion a year in sales. $1 billion a year in sales. Out of those, there was a handful of products that were actually losing money year over year. Now, why do they have them? Multiple reasons. A, word of mouth, right? So you wanted to bring more people in. So if you look at Aquafina as a great example versus Dasani, Aquafina was a PepsiCo product versus Dasani, which is a Coca-Cola product. We're similar age. So if you start thinking about 20 years ago and you bought a water product, think about the bottle. Thick product, big can caps, right? And now you buy something that is maybe private market or private label or even Aquafina or Dasani, and it's flimsy and the end caps are really, really, really small, right? So when you start thinking about it and you start thinking about cost of goods sold, you start thinking about commodities, plastic, oil, so on and so forth, the reduction in size of a product of, let's say, Dasani or Aquafina, for limiting to 1 cent or like half a centimeter in actual height, results in a fraction of 1 cent over 1 cent. However, when we start thinking about this in millions of volume or in capacity, you're talking at least $100 million in cost of goods sold reduction, right? So now the bottom line goes up by 100 million or whatever to offset the difference. People don't see that. They're like, well, I have big fingers, I'm too fat or whatnot, and they're unable to open it. Or if they're able to open it, the cap breaks or something like that. But it's a business, right? And people don't see that. Like it's really important to understand the lowest common denominator for me. So the widget. Think of a pen. You open the end cap of a pen. There's a spring. There's a tube. There's ink, and then there's the actual copper endpoint that actually does a pen, right? So if you start thinking about how a pen functions, you think about every cost associated with it, which is not including the actual closing and building of the pen. And what gets lost in translation is the ability to understand why the lowest denominator makes so much sense. I like to say widget. It doesn't matter what you say. But whenever I talk about something, I like to paint the picture. And being a finance nut and data centric and data, being able to really understand information, fractions of pennies of a penny over a long term and over a long capacity of volume make up a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And that's where people get lost in that. And they oversee that. They say, well, let's not think about it that way. Let's look at volume at a thicker tubing of a pen. Okay, but what does that cost over 100,000 pens made for Bic or any other company? And that's where people are not. They are now, but sometimes when you're working a brick and mortar or small business, they don't look at it that way. They want to sell, and they're looking for ways to sell quickly, irrespective of the bottom line cost that's going to cost them. So they see the numbers, and sometimes they don't care. They might get business loans, they might do SBA loans, they might do something else to offset, and they're not paying attention to the numbers through a business operating system or implementation of ERP, CPMs. And then suddenly, year end, they're making very little money. They have very little owner equity. Employees are making more than they are, and they're stuck being 55, 60 years old, not being able to take a vacation because they're not on top of their business. Not in a good way or bad way. They're just, I'm not saying naive either. I'm just saying that there's metrics that they need sometimes a hand holding on from an outside perspective, because what their father and their grandfather told them is adequate and valid. But when with the shift of how the economy is going, and with the shift of how commodities are going and oil pricing, and now you have to look at economic, socioeconomic conditions through the countries, through Venezuela, through South America, through Middle East, how they're shipping, and now how Trump is doing certain things to minimize tanker interaction with Venezuela. There's a lot of factors that come into play that are super outside the scope that a lot of companies aren't dealing with. And that's where we come into play. And that's why it's important, including AI, right? To make their lives easier, to support their interaction with the customers, and to ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a customer journey. If I were to buy from someone, I want to make sure my life is a lot easier because I bought from them. And if I go somewhere and I start talking about what I need, how do I get there, what are you able to do? If they're able to handhold me and say, okay, this is what you have to do, this is why you have to do it, this is what we need to do, I'm all in.
Right. So, moving it along a little bit along here, what are some of the strategies or frameworks that are producing the best results in your for your clients today?
I'm big. I'm very big into visualization. I'm a project manager at heart. I like to see end state, current state, and what steps are we doing to get there. And I hate the terminology of reverse engineering and this is what we have to do, baby, blah blah. I get that. I hate using those words, but if I'm unable to visualize where we're going to get to at the end of the day and support them in their best for the best interests of what the client needs, I'm at a disservice for them. So when it comes to frameworks, I have a myriad of SOPs and certain things that I like to look at before I do something, and I stress test that always with AI right now. So I look at their financials, I look at their last 3 to 5 years, import it. I come up with my own set of questions. I I've worked with AI enough to create a bunch of operators and find ways to have them think of how they're responding based on certain criterias and companies. So I have my own McKinsey and Bain and BCG consultant. I have so and so from PwC, Deloitte, KPMG, Ernst and Young. I have people that look at. I have AI that looks at things differently than how I look at. I look at it, and then we sort of work together to come up with a certain answer. The main criteria that I look at is I want brutal honesty and truth from who I work with and what I do. So whenever I work with certain systems, I don't want fluff. I don't want them to agree with me for whatever I say. I want them to say, you know what, I disagree with you. And that's just hard to do, because if you don't have the humility and perspective of saying, you know what, I screwed up, or maybe I didn't think of it the right way, you're not going to become better. And the last thing I want to do is to be inefficient in what I do and take on less accountability than what I should be taking. So when it comes to frameworks, I'm big into frameworks. I'm big into SOP. I'm big into structure. Adaptability after the structure is made and created is very important, because if I'm able to do A, B, and C, and they're able to support that direction of what we're trying to do, and the owner is on board, boom, we're going straight for it.
Okay. So what are some of the, you said you want them to be straightforward. What are some of the things you've run into that has caused you to go, whoa, maybe we're not on the same page, or what have you done? what has kind of happened? You don't need to use the company's name, but what are some of those areas that you've come across that go, wow, we're heading in two totally different directions. How are you able to get them back on the same page, or just say we're not going to be able to do this? When is that kind of a part of the conversation?
Thankfully, it's a bit at the beginning, and the reason why is how they're able to import the information, and what we talked about BS in being versus BS out. I have a really big BS meter, so I could really understand when something is not looking good, and I will push it, right. So right off the bat, in most cases, within a few days after I get the financials, I could find out pretty quickly as to where they are and where they need to be. So I will call them out immediately. And what tends to happen is there's because they have an in-house accounting program or system, or they have a CPA that doesn't have all the information because things are hidden, or they don't want to give them all the information. There's a lot of lack of information that comes out to me that I see, and I'm able to sort of break out and bring that to their attention. Very few times I've been swayed in the wrong direction where it took me time to see it. But right now, since I've been learning this over the years, one of the things I like to think about is speed to insight and fail fast, right? So we all have heard fail fast. Speed to insight is coming from a colleague of mine that worked with me in Kemper, that it's the same thing as failing fast, right? It's sort of how quickly are you able to get to where you have to get to with the information that you need to make an informed business decision. And you could only be 80% of the way there. It doesn't matter, but 80% is enough, right? And failing fast is the same way. 80%. Maybe you're not all the way there. Don't waste your time. Get there, stop, pivot, move. And if you're able to fail and you're able to figure out what's going on, you're able to pivot quickly. So ultimately, it's all about adaptation to where you are. And that's why we have frameworks in place, right? That's why I have an SLP in place. I'm very structured, like I said. It's like I know what I need to do. If people are giving me information, I will ask a lot of questions. Typically, I have over 150 questions I ask, and all the questions are always different. It's never the same question. Never, very seldom are they the same. Questions like, okay, well, tell me about EBITDA or no bit or whatnot, and this the capex that you did on this product. I like to dig into the details, and once I look at the cash flow statement, and I see where the money's coming in, coming out, balance sheet, and then I look at the P&L. I like to dig into the actual chart of accounts and really push those numbers. That typically happens after the first 3 days. I will always have questions. Always have questions. I'm a total disservice if I don't have at least 50 questions. And some of the questions are going to be mundane. They're going to be stupid. It doesn't matter. It's not a lack of being inquisitive. It's just double checking that the information that I'm thinking of is correct. So I will always ask a question, even if I know the answer. I want to hear them say the answer,
Right.
and it will always be in writing.
Yeah, and you're giving you're if you're not communicating with them and being able to get, like you said, the true answer from them by continuing asking questions, it's going to come out one way or the other because you're going to ask it so many times that they're going to give you the information finally, and you'll be like, oh, okay, now I can point you in a better direction than where we were
Well,
going.
so funny. I tend to think of things so differently sometimes that I will ask the same question 4 or 5 different ways, and I'll build it into a story like a case study, and try to give answers. And of course, my goal is to get a same answer every single time. Verbiage wise, will be different, of course, but if the reasoning is the same as to how they got there, I'm cool with it.
Right.
I will obviously push it to the extreme sometimes, saying, you know what, maybe I don't believe them, or maybe this doesn't seem right to me. Show me how you got there. And then we'll walk through the process. Like I said, I'm visual, right? So I'll get the whiteboard out and we'll start looking at it. We'll start creating pinpoints of how they got there, what the reasoning is. And I'll tell you what, I'm a human. I make mistakes, right? We all do. How I adapt to those and what do I do to make myself better, more efficient is what matters.
Yeah. So one final question before we close this out, because we're on a time crunch with you. It's not a problem. What trends do you see shaping the future of consulting over the next few years?
Yeah, I think automation is so I mean, Jesus Christ, the last 2 years have been so. 2022, OpenAI started really coming out, and we took it for granted. I think there's a lot of things that we enjoyed that we're unable to comprehend at the moment in time. I know a lot of people that are really digging into AI, machine learning, and everything else, and they started really to understand and stress test everything that goes on. And I part of me says that down the line, I think there's a lot of companies that are going to push away from consulting because of AI and much cheaper, and I get that. I really do. I do understand that, and I think the same way. I think there's a lot of things that companies are able to do from a larger scale to provide value add information. What my niche is different is I work with a much smaller scale companies that don't necessarily have the capacity to spend even a little amount of money, and I'm talking minimal to create operators. They don't have the capacity and they don't want to do it because they're mom and pops. They've been given jobs from the parents to the grandparents, and they're working their way down. And you're talking people in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and in Akron, and in Cheyenne. I mean, everywhere that you talk about, there's tons of companies that are looking to change and make themselves better. They're unable to figure out what is going on. They heard about it, but they're not willing just yet to acclimate themselves to get there. I will be extremely naive to not think that automation is not the way of the future. I mean, ridiculous. I run 18 different AI programs in what I do day to day. Create operators, create voice, personalities, everything that I have to do in terms of reasoning. I have GPTs for everything from law to compliance to a CFO to McKinsey to everything else that I've done to create thought processes. I question. I'm very curious on everything I do. So automation is the way of the future. If companies are unable to adapt, and this is going to be another interesting point from a healthcare perspective. About 10,000 people are retiring on a daily basis for the next 15 years. Just put that into place for a second. Out of that, you have, let's say, 75%, to be conservative, run SMBs, which is the majority of the workforce of the U.S. Out of that, not necessarily all of them are going to be able to hand down the company to the children because maybe the children don't care for the company or they want to go somewhere else and they want to do something else. So there's a lot of wealth and or companies out there that do not have the next step in the process of growing and even selling or whatnot. So there's opportunity for automation from a personal perspective, to purchase other companies, to keep that going. That's part number one. And two, to help them sell companies to other people so that they're well off and they're able to retire, not worrying about health insurance, life insurance, burial costs, family planning, legacy. There's a lot of things that go on there. Automation is the wave of the future. Honestly, for me, it's huge. I continually try to at least put in 2 hours a day, in understanding everything that changes every single day. 5.2 came out. I want to know everything about 5.2 for ChatGPT. 1.6 for Manus came out. I want to know everything that comes out. Banana Pro, same thing. Every single day, I want to delve in and dedicate 2 hours per day. I always do that at the end of the day. I want to do what I have to do during the day. When the day's over, I will sit down, have dinner with the kids, come back, get on the computer, and sort of bang it out. And ultimately, being curious is the best thing one person can do from a consulting perspective and management perspective. I do think that management consulting in general has shifted a lot in the last few years. I do see that a lot of larger companies are going to be managing out their own practices because of AI. I do think that the $500 an hour consulting companies are going to shift away, and they're going to find ways to add value differently than what they're doing right now. I do think that a lot of programs that we do use are extremely solid. However, they don't show the humility and touch that humans do have right now. So I do think blue collar jobs are going to be in high demand for the future. I don't see a lot of change there just yet. Down the line, I do see changes, but I think for the next 10 years, at least for me, from my perspective, next 10 years, I think, HVAC, plumbing, lawn care, there's certain things that are going to be just in demand, right? And, if you look at laundromats, you look at car washing, there's certain things that car washing maybe is going to be, maybe there. Laundromats probably down the line are going to be pretty much automated. But in the meantime, I think there's a shift where at least for the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be a lot of demand for that. White collar jobs, especially finance, HR, certain aspects of operations, marketing, sales, marketing, maybe not sales, are going to be automated relatively quickly. Again, it's being on the forefront of what what this program does and what AI does compared to what you're able to know and adapt to is crucial. Adaptability is the biggest thing that we have in front of us right now. Being held accountable and transparent is very important. But if we're able to really know what we're able to do and change with what comes around us, we could only make everyone else's lives better and stronger. That said, every single day things change, right? We all see it, and what I think of today can change tomorrow. It can change in 2 hours from now. It's there was a semi State of the Union yesterday from Trump, and he comes with a bunch of ideas, and we talked about ACA and healthcare, and he brought it up yesterday, right? So there's these big bills and this and that, and we have to adapt to it. We cannot be complacent. We cannot sit there waiting for answers from the government because we're not going to get them. And irrespective of religion or politics, it doesn't really matter. We should always try to strive to make ourselves better and our family better and be better in the society to get there. And learning is probably the best way to get there, but being held accountable and adapting to what's around us to help others is paramount too.
I agree with that. Being able to look someone in the eye and tell them what needs to happen and how it needs to happen and be, brutally honest is the biggest thing. I feel that, yeah, there's multiple ways you can do something, but from my perspective, this is the way we see it, and this is the way that this is the best at this moment in time. Has been one of those things that I've always said is this is the best you have right here, moment in time. We can continue to work with this and grow it and develop it and make it even better and faster. But at the end of the day, this is what we have. This is what I have for you. And so
Live in
you,
the moment.
yeah, there you go. Well, Derek, thank you for your time, for sharing your journey, insights. It was very informational. I think you bring a lot to the table, and this information being shared is going to be very positive for people. Is there a way that people can reach out to you and get in touch with you and your business?
Yeah, so my website's Consulgenix, ConsultGenix.com. I work on referrals, so I never got into SEO and IG. However, I did start an IG page, Consulgenix,
Okay.
Consultgenix. There's nothing on it just yet. That's one of them. My email is derek@consulgenix.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So under Derek, Derek, last name Space. But I mean, for me, it's all about helping and what I'm able to do. And if people want to reach out just to spitball ideas and, just tell me what they're thinking and what I'm able to think of and see if we're able to help someone to get to a place, let me know and I'll, gladly help out and just giving you some ideas where to go and guide yourself to figure out what's next in your life. And of course, if you need help with something else further than that, then obviously let me know. But, again, just being curious is the best thing you can do right now in our life, especially with AI and with all the craziness that goes around us. Don't be complacent. Don't be stagnant. Put your best foot forward and always be curious, because without curiosity, your mental mind is going to be lost, and you will be stuck. And that's the last thing we need is for more people to be stuck and being what they call analysis paralysis. And I've been there, right? So I've seen it, and it's very very difficult to get out. Too many questions, too many answers, and you don't know where to go. So if you need guidance with it, just let me know and gladly help out just to put you in the right path.
Well, and like you said earlier, being able to go have dinner, come back and sit there for 2 hours and go over, the information you need to learn or new ideas or new technology that may be beneficial to you and your company. That's very important. Get away from it and take a breath and then come back to it and be fresh, focused to be able to learn. And that's another thing that I took from your conversation and what you do,
Yeah.
and it's very positive.
Yeah, really quick, Derek, too. I mean, there's, through LinkedIn, there's a lot of really cool resources, but Substack also has got amazing resources. A lot of it is free as well. Yeah, you have some paid memberships and stuff like that, but you can gain a lot of information, especially with what's going on right now. My favorite platform is LinkedIn, just because of what I do.
Yep.
I'm not into TikTok. IG is new. I'm in Facebook. I'm old, so I have Facebook. Um, but I'm not super involved in the other two platforms. But LinkedIn, super big, and of course, just networking is major. So again, if someone has a problem, reach out to anyone. Just so you know that knows more than you, or just get a better perspective of something, because the last thing you want is analysis paralysis, and you do nothing.
Yeah.
That's what you do not want to do. Take action, put forward. Hashtag take action, and never
Indeed.
stop, because if you do, you are going to hit the road and you're going to hit that wall pretty quickly,
Yep.
and you're going to get lost. So,
Yeah.
never a stupid question. You'll get the answers that you need, but just ask the questions, because if you don't ask questions and you don't take action, nothing is going to change.
Exactly. Well, Derek, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek.
And I'm going to end the call.